All right. We are live, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm here today with Jenner Zeno. Bum, 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 bum.
Howdy.
Thank you. I was going to be with BJ today. Unfortunately, he was a little busy with his child and everything, so that's fine. I believe we're going to do that with him tomorrow and possibly Jenner again. We'll see. We're in a little bit, we had a pre-chat, but we're going to take just a minute before we really get into this because I need to at least blast it out to one or two other groups. And
Absolutely.
I think Jenner's going to do the same.
I am. Now, are you streaming this to your Facebook group
Yeah.
or to YouTube?
This one is to the Facebook group right now.
Okay. So let me pop in there real quick. I will share it out to my people because we had a couple people in Mindwave who were like, yay. And I'm like, yeah, I know, right? Fine.
Right.
Let's fucking do it, man. I'm all about it.
Oh.
Archetype. There we go. So I'm going to find that, blast it out on my personal page, and then blast it out in the Mindwave universe as well.
All right. Cool. All right, so we had a little pre-chat in the green room with ourselves and our agents and secretaries and everything else because we weren't totally prepared. Actually, how this came about was last night, Jenner and I were bored in our separate universes and separate states of mind and states of the country. And we're like, what's up, what's up? And I was watching Rick and Morty. We both have a Rick and Morty shirts on, and that's why the original like promotion I did for this only an hour ago was with some Rick memes about God and how that sort of stream of consciousness of the universe came about was I mentioned as I'm watching that, almost all caught up with the most recent season before the new episodes come out. I'm thinking this is how, referring to Rick from Rick and Morty, Rick Sanchez, this is how someone acts if there is no God. And that's fine, but the reason and the way that I was originally going to do videos of this type about now was on the idea of how to act as if there's a God, or if you should do that, or what it's like to act as if there's no God, or probably, at least from my opinion or perspective, it's good to act sort of in the duality of both. Like, how, if I behave as if there's a God, how does that manifest? And if I behave as if there's no God, how does that manifest? And if so, what does that happen, and what does that cause, both in the material world and the internal mind, consciousness, psyche, state of being, all that. And the reason I had got into that a few days ago is because Jesse from our friend over in another group, Mr. Rogers, yes, cool guy. He, although sometimes I troll him a little bit for fun, but he's a friend, and he started a group on that subject, which was what do you call it? The debate / discussion between Sam Harris, the what would you call him?
Neuroscientist, philosopher, and brilliant author, and kind of sexy guy who looks just a little bit like Ben Stiller. That's how I would describe him.
Okay, sure. That's a great quick intro. Although, okay, sure, okay, on board with that. For the most part, he's a cool guy. And okay, but the debate between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, was on this sort of issue a lot of how we act and why we act. And a lot of it is that Jordan Peterson roughly says that Sam says, of course, as he's the sort of I don't know, leader of the atheist or the new atheist movement, or not the leader, but one of the 3 or 4 or 5 main ones. He's saying that there's no God, but Jordan Peterson says if he, what we believe is more than just like words that we say, but it's how that we act. And sort of the thing that I would add on to that is if Sam or anyone behaved more as if they really, really believed and acted as there were no God, that their life would be more along the lines of how, like I said, Rick Sanchez acts. Mm-hmm. And although I think the sort of what do you call it? The search for righteousness, you might call it, of atheists or people along the lines of Sam Harris, it's almost like a righteousness of defending truth by trying to eliminate bad dogma and bad usefulness of, or the bad uses of faith and all those type of things. So I guess you could be like a Rick Sanchez kind of a guy, but if you have a belief in humanity and a belief in whatever, then you're kind of driven by this idea of God, which is, it's sort of a overcoming bad ideas of God. And so anyway, that's the sort of quick 5 or 6 minute intro of some stuff that we're going to chat about today. So I don't know if you want to tack anything onto that before we have a little chat for however many minutes or whatever. So take it away, Jenner.
Rick is a perfect encapsulation of this, and I realize it sounds very douchey to be like, oh yes, we're the highfalutin philosophy bros. We're going to talk about Rick and Morty and how deep and meaningful it is. But even Rick himself, in the episode where they accidentally break time and all the testicle monsters come to try to like, what's happening? That scene where Rick falls through the floor and he has the chance, he saves Morty and he thinks he's fucked. He thinks he's gonna die, and he's like even him in his darkest moment of like about to reach oblivion's like, oh God, please God save me, and then he finds the collar and puts it on. He saves himself. He's like, fuck you, God, not today, bitch. Yeah. So I think there's something kind of really deep there. I think if we and by we I mean humans, if we're gonna have a conversation even with ourselves about God, I think the biggest and most important question is one that people ignore, and this is something that's kind of been reemergent in my thing, is like the real question isn't is it it's what is it, what is God specifically, like what is it? Because there is this kind of internal external divide between how people think about this. Either they think it is an external force out there in the universe that is judging us and guiding us and will hold us accountable to our actions after we leave, or you have a vision of God that's almost kind of classically Christian, which in a classical sense, because modern Christians don't really think about this, but God is actually something inside. It's something inside of you that's reaching outwards. So that is more how I think about God. And I, as I was telling you in the green room, this idea of acting as if there was one, even if there's not, just in case. I mean, that does kind of bring in Pascal's wager a little bit, and we might touch on that later. But you don't need to pretend is the thing that I'm saying, because there is somebody watching and judging,
Mhm.
um, and it's the most important moral and philosophical and ethical uh, judge in your life, and it's you. It's internal. You know, when you reach the end of your life, if you're on your deathbed, you're judging yourself. And I invoked the duat, the Egyptian underworld of the heart being weighed against the feather,
Mhm.
because that feels like the right answer to me. And this is a really, really old one. And then so like a lot of this shit, a lot of the philosophy that we're going to be discussing, from henceforth, just about
Mhm.
anything, we're rediscovering. It's almost kind of like, the sands of time, and finding. It's the work was already done. We're kind of trying to rediscover ancient wisdom and export it to the rest of the world, because the Greeks had a good handle on this shit.
Ancient watch.
The Egyptians had a really good handle on this shit, and they had some really wacky and backwards ideas. They thought the brain was just useless meat, for example. So they just removed it. They just threw it away. They're just like, oh, just get the gunk out of the head.
Yeah. Ew, gross.
So, but there's some deep wisdom there, and
Mhm.
it's in the philosophical part of it. It's not so much the literal. And I think anybody who takes any of this in a literal sense is kind of missing the point. Maybe, if that's a good way to close out this, because there is such a thing as real truth, and then Peterson gets into this a lot: personal truths and metaphorical truths, if you will. And the
Yeah.
rational skeptics, kind of, we have a difficult time with this concept. It's like, well, no, it's like it's something is true or it's not. There's certainly varying degrees of you know the truth as a kind of flexible thing, but there are lines that clearly need to be drawn. 2 + 2 = 4. Water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen atoms put together in a specific way. So we're already trying to dig to the bedrock here. Let's maybe go back up a couple meters,
Mhm.
back to the surface, and look at the large area of dirt we're about to excavate, because we're
Sure.
digging at ancient wisdom, man. We're digging up some ruins, and
Yeah.
it's careful. We have to be careful. We don't want to break anything.
Well, okay. And so uh, a lot of what we're getting into is this idea of all the different ways to take apart and look at and put back together, basically um, engineering reality, including uh, our values and how that our values should and could play out, and engineering, which is kind of what mythology is, but it's also um, what everything is. Like we have a world of facts, and including, like you said, arithmetic fact and physical facts, as far as what carbon is and and so there's all those facts. As far as we know, those are facts. But to put together, so like we know this assembly of facts of like, here's some math and here's some physical ideas, or some physical facts and realities. Um, but then what we do with those facts is like, okay, like just like, okay, here's a fact. There's a fact that there's like whatever 1,000 or however many thousands of nuclear bombs in the world. That's a fact. But what we do with that fact determines the fate of life and consciousness and humanity. Same thing with like, okay, here's an atom, and then originally they didn't know that what would happen exactly if we split the atom, but they had theoretical ideas, and they're like, okay, now we can split the atom and we can do all these things, and here's an atom bomb, and we can start blowing shit up or whatever. So it's like we put it through the lens of plans and ideas and stories, you could even say, because it's like, what were they doing when they're like on the Manhattan Project making atomic bombs? They were trying to discover innate facts, and they're still they're still doing that, trying to split the atom down even deeper and everything else. And then it's like, what do we do with those facts? And sometimes it's like, what they're doing with CERN right now. I don't know if we want to get into that whole thing of they're trying to split the atom even deeper, and then if that could cause a black hole that would destroy the Earth within 5 years, and if that's worth the risk. But the whole idea is we have this world of facts, but we have to put it through the filter of values, and then in so doing, we're always putting together stories and mental models and value structures, and then we try to say, okay, we've got those, and what do you do with them? And then we kind of like put it out in the universe of ideas, whether that's just free speech, like talking like we're doing right now, or people are constantly talking about what to do in the coronavirus world and everything else. So, and then something we'll get into also is the idea of how these things manifest in the material world. Like, okay, let's not blow everything up, but then, and you can run this in a lot of different scenarios to also, okay, not only we're not going to blow everything up, but because we're not blowing everything up and we agreed to a nuclear treaty or whatever, that makes the world trust each other more. And then we're not only not blown up, but we have more trust inside and out between each other and everything else. And then we have a better world that's really built on psychology and mental models and agreements more than almost any material thing. So that was a lot of things I just said.
Yeah. It is the ethical implications of the facts, because the facts by themselves are kind of amoral. They don't have there is no,
they don't care about
us. Exactly. It's the universe doesn't give a fuck about you. It's that thing. And the splitting of the atom is actually a really beautiful example, because factually and physically we can do that. It releases a crazy amount of energy, but understanding the atom at the fundamental level, the thing that allows us to split it and create massive devastation, unthinkable,
or
power
power
of
cities,
the gods type shit. It's the same thing that enables the safest and cleanest power generation thing that we have, which is nuclear power, which is, it goes off of fission. It's different. We'll get to fusion eventually. Yeah. But it's what you do with it. It's kind of like it's a tool. You can use a hammer to build a treehouse for your kids in the backyard, or you can use it to smash in your neighbor's head for leaving his garbage cans out on the curb. Depending on who you are and where you are, where your compass is, so to speak.
Yeah,
so
your
the
values.
Tools, yes, it's all in the values questions and in the ethics. And the thing that gets at that is conversations like this, because you have to be willing to unpack. It's not enough just to say this is reality. This is the way that it is. You have to then step in and say, okay, what are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with this information? Like discovering, sequencing the human genome. What are we going to do with this information? Because we could use it to solve all kinds of diseases. And improve quality of life for billions of people. We could also use it potentially in a kind of biological weapon type way to exterminate people, or to the designer baby thing, and then so there's
or super soldiers.
Yes. So it's the ethics is where the question really kind of comes in. We have to agree on what the facts are, and this is a big barrier, especially if you're talking about like the age of the earth or something with Christian fundamentalists. You have to agree what the facts are first, and then you can dig into the ethics of what is actually the best way to move forward. And that is a democratic process. It is an evolutionary process, as I draw this line all the time to evolution in the war of ideas. Some of them are going to win, some of them are going to die out, and
Right.
it's just a matter of which ones are allowed to thrive and spread, and which, time will tell. But I said a lot there as well, so I'm going to
Yeah,
bounce
yeah.
it back to you.
Sure. Okay. So we got on the whole nuclear war thing, but I'll bounce that back to something more practical that we mentioned briefly before we started recording, which was something that Jordan and Sam talked about in their second on-stage debate, I guess. About 15 minutes into the video, if anybody wants to watch it. But they just had this, what do you call it? Sort of mythology between them that they agreed on, because a lot of their discussion, like I mentioned, was what happens if we act as if there is a god or something like a god, and then what happens if we act as if there's not. And so, sort of a mythology that they agreed between them to say some things that we know are not fact, but we act as if that they were, because Jordan Peterson says he won't say outright that he believes in God, but he says he tries to act or behave as if that there is a God, and really, in some effect, we all do in some way or another, even if we want to call that a maybe it's a deeper level of consciousness, or the deep unconsciousness, or the ultimate self, the holy atom, or atom, and all these other things that you can get into that are kind of like actually what this what do you call it, the virtue in man or whatever, but which comes down to just, what do you call it, the um supreme individual, or the hero. And I don't know if we can get into all that today. um so anyway, basically the fiction was, um if like two guys are handling a gun together, a weapon, a handgun, we'll say, and if we wanted to, if we're in the same room and we said, okay, here's this gun, we take it apart, make sure there's no bullets, and then I hand it to you, and that's a way that the whole time we act as if there's a bullet in there, or it's full of bullets, even though we know it's not. And then the reason is because if you didn't act that way, um, you could be wrong, because somehow you slip up, you make a human error, or whatever the case. And then what happens is two things, and only one of the two they really got into. So one thing is the practical aspect of no one gets shot, which is good, because sometimes accidents happen like that. And then the other is the trust between the two of them, because even if they're being a little bit overly cautious, then it should build, like if there's two guys handling a gun and they do it the right way, then they build a trust. They maybe teach each other some things. They build a better sort of intersubjective world between them about not just the gun, but like the trust and the human element between them, or between two people. And then the other two is just like becoming a more, safe and cautious person, a person who values human life, a person who doesn't take unnecessary risk, those type of things. So it's like an internal thing, not just the external practical, no one accidentally gets shot in the face and all that. So that comes from a fiction. And the reason that we got onto this is because we're talking about if it's better sometimes to act. See, the thing is, okay, so it's like, should we act as if there's a God? And should we act as if there's not? Or do you, or is that kind of silly and you don't need to pretend? But, I would kind of say, if you act as if there's a God, what you're doing, whether you're a fundamentalist Christian or you're just a person, whether you want to say kind of like a Jordan Peterson or someone who's just kind of Pascal's wager, not just Pascal's wager for afterlife, but Pascal's wager for it's better to act that way, so I will be a better person in this life. Um, well, and the thing about Pascal's wager too is that's really superficial, a really superficial way of looking at it as like, oh, do this and this and this for Christianity slash whatever in case there's a God, because if you're wrong, no big deal. You're just over. But if you're right, then you get to go into eternal bliss and happiness instead of hell. Uh, that's the wager part of it. But I feel like what we're talking about is more like back to the Rick Sanchez thing of not being a douchebag compared, right now in this world, compared to the possibility of being unnecessarily being a douchebag, which is kind of how some people can get sometimes when they can get all nihilistic, and maybe that's not the best terminology.
There's a great parallel going on right now. You realize that, right?
Which one? Because I just made like 3 or 4 parallels.
The self quarantine thing.
Oh yeah.
Self isolation. This goes into personal responsibility.
Right.
Whether or not you think you have it or you think you're going to get it, you still take the extra
Right,
precautions,
right.
and it's a level of personal responsibility and respect for other people. And you see a lot of people kind of going off the deep end on
Mhm.
this.
Yeah, both
And
sides
then
of it.
just like, we're going to throw a virus party. Bring your kids. Trump wants you to. And this is
Yeah,
obviously a very dangerous, backwards, fucked up idea.
right.
Um, but it's nuanced.
Yeah,
There is a level of personal freedom that a lot of people have feel like has been taken away from them. The choice is no longer theirs. Let alone introducing the economic insecurity of this to people going, well, how the fuck am I going to feed my kids?
yeah,
It's the the parallel there is just, it really kind of struck me as like, it's
yeah.
like, act as it in this case, act as if there is a God that is the virus, the plague,
Right.
okay, that's wiping out the lands. um but it doesn't require anything kind of supernatural. I think that's me coming into it, the long time kind of rational atheist, in heavy air quotes, skeptic in me,
Mm.
is willing to grant that there's value there. My contention is always in invoking the supernatural. I feel like that's an unnecessary step we don't need to
Yeah,
take, when there are better reasons. It's you can draw a million other parallels from there to, like, there is a better reason to act on climate change, for example, than worrying about identity politics, for example,
right.
which is one thing that we've talked about before on the show.
Yeah,
There are better reasons. God, what's that quote? Better reasons already exist. It's one of those things.
yeah.
But I had just recorded it probably the best episode of my show ever, and it's going to become episode 100 of Mindwave, and it was with my dad, which was
Okay.
crazy.
That's
But
deep.
it was crazy deep. It's an amazing conversation. But I was reminded of this Carl Sagan quote
Mm.
from Pale Blue Dot, A Vision of the Human Future in Space, where Carl said,
Carl Sagan.
the significance of our lives and our fragile planet is then
Mm.
determined only by our own wisdom and courage. We are the custodians of life's meaning. We long for a parent to care for us, to forgive us our errors, to save us from our childish mistakes. But knowledge is preferable to ignorance. Better by far to embrace the hard truth than a reassuring fable. If we crave some cosmic purpose, then let us find ourselves a worthy goal.
Wow.
Fucking Dang.
There you go.
There we go, man. That's we're done, right? I think we
Yeah.
I think we solved the I
Drop
think we
drop the
solved the
curtain
problem.
right
Yeah.
there.
Mic drop. This one's attached, so I'm not, and it's also really expensive, so I'm not going to drop it. So, but
Okay.
I think that's what
Drop a
we're
different
getting
one.
at here, right?
Yeah.
God, love that. Love Carl, man. Oh boy.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to word this, but okay. Okay, so I don't know if I mentioned this in our green room or live, but or maybe both a little. But okay, so it's good to be able to hold the uh, duality as much as possible. In other words, and the main dualities are evil and good and evil, and also being and non-being. So I believe it's good to say and I really 100% believe we're always doing this, but we just don't always know it, which is we're always, at least in the God sense, even unconsciously on some level, however deep it goes or however much we try to cover it, we're always trying to like somehow think, is there a God or not? Or is God me? And so, or am I God, in the whole
Mm-hmm.
like Rick Sanchez universe?
He might have
Um,
the right answer. If there is a God, it's me, motherfucker. I think that's
yeah.
the best kind of like attitude to have about it.
Well,
Really.
that
Not
that
in an
show gets
egocentric way, but in like a
well.
if there's a thing that we're talking about, it's inside all of us. Like we're all
Well, but that's the
in
key,
that
that
sense.
it's inside the individual and it's inside everybody.
The collective. Yeah.
Right. So and that's where it gets confusing, and it's inside of whatever that it gets confusing too, because it's inside of me, it's inside of you, it's inside of my dog in some level, but on a lower level, it's inside of a tree on a lower perhaps a lower level. We don't really even know. It's inside of the sun, it's inside of like flowing through everything, but we don't really understand, comprehend all of it, which is kind of an interesting thing, because so it's like there's the I don't know, we mentioned it just a little bit ago, how that nature doesn't really give a crap about us, or it's indifferent to us, and that offends the human ego.
Yeah.
But if you want to say that base part of nature, that most like center um uh I don't know, the most fundamental part of nature, like the most transformative for higher consciousness or whatever. Um, Now I forget where I was going with that, but that's like inside of everybody, inside of everything. Oh, okay, but the reason, okay, one reason why it might be better sometimes to say there could be a God, we just don't know exactly what it is or how it manifests or some of those things, but we have clues. Um, is exactly the whole Rick Sanchez screw you, if there's a God it's me. It's because, and the Buddhists and some of these like light bringers slash new age people, that they run into this problem of, if I seek enlightenment, which is to kill the ego, that's an egotistical thing. And so sort of on one hand, on the, we'll say, Christian aspect, it can be an overcoming of the ego to give it up to God. And I know that's debatable, but in a way, it overcomes the ego if you give it up to God, so to speak, or surrender to God. Because then on the other hand, if there is no God, but it's just this enlightenment thing, then it's this like egotistical trap. And so the idea, submitting to the idea or the possibility, and it might be as simple, the escape from that trap might be as simple as saying, and so I have a lot of respect for the people who are borderline atheists slash agnostics, but they don't say I believe there's a God, I'm agnostic, or I'm atheist or anything, but they find the limits of what that they know, and they say there could be this, there could be that, and they try to work in the aspects of, because okay, the and I'll wrap up my tangent on this idea too, is that I don't know, maybe I should just wrap it up there, but
No, it's great. We're digging in. We're digging in the same hole, and there's something down there.
yeah,
I think
it's a deep
that
hole.
the frustrating part of this, or anyway, the part that feels frustrating about this is because we're trying to play the understanding game,
Yeah,
and so much of the rest of the 8 billion or whatever humans that they are, we're still playing the language game to where we can't even agree on what words mean. And that makes it very difficult to
yeah.
even start to have a conversation, which is why anytime God is invoked now,
Oh yeah, that's where I was trying to go. But
I'm
yeah,
like, what does that mean? I'm not asking you which one you subscribe to. I'm not asking
right.
you which ancient text you're going off of. I'm saying what are you actually talking about? And this is what put me in the camp with the atheist, because I didn't fucking understand. I'm like, are you literally saying that there's a man in the clouds sitting up there judging us every time we jerk off? Because that doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah,
Is there an evil horned red guy down under the ground in lakes of fire who's going to torture us? Like, you guys, like, what are we actually talking about? That's the thing. I
yeah,
feel like so many people lost the thread, the metaphorical,
but the thing is,
shit,
and
and took it literally. And
this is kind of where it comes together, is that uh, if that's literal or metaphorical, it can somewhat have the same effect. But by metaphorical, I mean like how you mentioned how the ultimate judge is yourself. So the little, the guy in with a white beard in the clouds, you could say is to some degree your conscience sitting inside of you, but at the same time, that conscience sitting inside of you, judging yourself, like you say, is also inside of everybody else, which is a different type. Inside of everybody else as individuals, but also as different types of collectives. And then that little horned goblin guy, the devil or whatever, he's inside of all of us, maybe not literally, but probably metaphorically, in that the quote that I often mention that goes right along with your Carl Sagan is Carl Jung famously said how the world hangs on a thin thread, which is the human psyche, in that human consciousness, not nature, brought about the atomic bomb, which is something that could destroy consciousness, at least as far as we know it in this human advanced way. And if those nukes go off, because he made this quote in his interview in I don't know if it's probably the late 50s or mid 50s, but if those nukes go off, which they had then about as many as they have now, that's it for humanity. And those nukes going off, this kind of diverging back into our nuclear talk, is that to a certain degree, and that was the whole thing with when Trump got into office. They're like, oh no, he's gonna have the nuclear codes, I don't trust him. But in America, we have a lot of protections that sure, if you think he's a crazy guy that's gonna be like, oh, you gotta launch the nukes, I don't trust China or whatever. Yeah, maybe, but we have a lot of protection, so that probably wouldn't happen, even if that halfway happened. But still, we have to, so many other countries have them and everything else. Now I forget how I got on this tangent. But
It's I'll pick up the thread right there because
sure, sure.
if you listen to the original Cosmos, sorry, watch
Uh-huh.
the original Cosmos series. It was very much there was this tension hanging in the air
Right, right.
of we could all disappear any day because
Uh,
one of these things go
about
off
what year
and
was
they
that, by the
all
way?
go off.
About what year was that, by the way?
The original Cosmos series aired in the 80s.
Mm. During the
And
Cold War.
yes, so during picking up the year I was born, 1986, there were 70,300 active weapons on Earth. 70,300 nuclear
Yeah, that
weapons
was
in
right.
1986.
Right. That was just a couple years before they started disarming most of them.
Yes. As of 2019, there were approximately 3,750 active warheads and 13,890 total warheads in the world, many decommissioned, stored, partially dismantled, partially destroyed, used for nuclear power, etc. So the threat is
Mhm.
nowhere near as high as it was during the Cold War. I mean, we
We
got
still
rid
have
of
enough to.
most of them, but we have more than enough to
Yeah.
destroy the world still, which
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
terrify you.
Yeah.
Um, that's all I wanted to add in there because I'm like I got to be a nerd. I got to look that up because
Oh,
it
yeah.
was a lot and it's not that much now, but it's still more than enough to destroy the world as we
Okay.
know it.
Agreed. Before I forget, this is Jeff. You know Jeff, right?
Yes, I saw that pop up in the comments, and I was going to toss that to you because I actually have to tinkle real quick, so I'll
Okay.
still be able to hear you. You won't be able to hear me tinkle. I'm going to turn my mic down, but give me 2 seconds, and then we will come back and respond to Jeff because we have a viewer. We have a viewer. Hi, Jeff.
We have,
Uh,
yeah, I think two viewers. I don't. Anyway, all right, cool. That's Jeff. We'll take a 1 minute break and be right back. Okay. If we look at it from the quarantine and even the same argument against Pascal's wager, look at it. Um, which side is potentially right? Are the people who are against wanting to open up the right ones or the wrong ones? The issue with Pascal's wager, or simply saying, don't be in, don't be a douche, is assuming we are right to begin with when we really almost never know. Okay, so that last part is the crucial key of what we know or don't know. And we'll get into that, which is the idea of mental models and putting together the best plans that we can and going from there. All right. All right. You didn't have your headset on, but that's fine. I just read the comment here from Jeff, so that's cool. We got one or two or three people chiming in.
nice.
And feel free to chime in, anybody. But okay, so that's cool. We can diverge a little to the idea of what we're in right now. By the way, if anybody's watching this in the future, however many uh, days or centuries, this is 42720. captain's log of the Starship Enterprise. But okay, so we're in quarantine right now, and the debate is if we should just put the world back to normal or not do so, continue the restrictions. And okay, so let me see if I can put this in context, because a lot of people will say, I don't know if we should go as far as to say the dumb people or the whatevers, but they haven't considered all the facts, we'll say, which is interesting because we talked a little bit about facts and what you do with facts and all that. So, okay, here's the facts. I don't know if you can look this up, but okay, the federal guidelines for the stay-at-home orders haven't changed since they started, and I'm not sure what those all are, but there's something like don't get in groups of 10, stay 6 feet apart. Maybe there's, I think, like 6 or 8 of these federal guidelines which haven't really changed, and then they kind of put it on the states what to do from there. And then the same thing happened when they're talking about lifting the state guidelines, is they just advise the states, if you the thing is, I don't think, well, okay, so then they said, okay, here's like a 4-phase plan to lift the guidelines, and each of those phases says we need to see a 14-day improvement. Although I think in that 14-day improvement, it says less cases, new cases of COVID, which is tricky to put down because the testing is going up dramatically. So of course, the new cases will go up dramatically, even if so that can get confusing. So like in New York, for example, so a lot of states are trying to put together their own version of this. Like in New York, for example, I haven't looked at all the details, but one thing is that they said they're not looking at new cases. They're looking at a decline in hospitalization for 14 consecutive days. And then they will go into their phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and all that. So that being said, I feel like the confusing part is, and I talked about this a little bit in my live that I did last week, but that one went really long. But the confusing part is the language, because if you say, hey, let's do this, open up restaurants, or maybe put some kids back in school here or there, whatever the case, then you almost got to say, oh, but there's only going to be a 1% increase in the deaths by COVID or whatever. And then you're kind of saying, like Dr. Oz got in trouble for that, because then it's like, oh, you want to kill like 1 million people or so many thousands of people or whatever, so.
Mr. Oz. He's not a fucking doctor. Fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Little boy Oz. I don't know. The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
That might be because he's kind of like just the man behind the curtain.
Oh God.
Yeah. Okay. So the Wizard of Oz said, well, he was kind of just saying, okay, guys, let's. He was talking about putting kids back in school and like, oh, that'll only cause this many more deaths. And then he got in trouble. He had to make a public apology because, that's like, oh, that's like thousands of people. You want to kill thousands of people. So anyway, the tricky part now is the language, because we have to be able to come out and say, here's the balance that we're trying to find, where the best public health decision is to do this A, B, and C. And that's really, really, really nebulous and unclear. So to get to Jeff's point is, and I mentioned this real quick while I was reading it, and I think your headset was off, is that the key to Jeff's point here is I think the last line is we almost never know. And so we're constantly voyaging into the unknown. We are constantly boldly going where no man has gone before. Maybe some of us are cowardly going where no man has gone before, constantly. But how that we do it is we build mental models, or we build plans. Even you could just say, we've got a plan, and the plan might be, okay, we're going to open the country like this, which is going to be ABCD, because they have like a 4-phase plan. But that plan is so confusing, because it's like, okay, are we going to go through phases by hospitalizations or by cases? And then if it's by cases, that makes sense because the testing is going up by quite a bit. And there'll be like a certain amount of that. It's just really confusing. And the reason I say all that is because if we could somehow say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everyone around the world, this is our exact plan, and here's how we're going to do it, then I feel like the world, including the people like protesting and everything else, like open up the world now, then they would be able to say, okay, cool, I see exactly how that's going to happen. So because I see exactly how that's going to happen, I'll be cool and do whatever anybody says. Or maybe not all the people, but most of the people, or at least most of even the ones that are protesting now or whatever. And then whatever they say, okay, at this date in maybe May, we'll be in phase 1. It'll include opening up these things, maybe with mask and gloves or whatever. And then phase 2 will be like this, maybe in June or July. And phase 3 will be like this, probably in August, so we can get kids back at school. And then phase 4 or 5 will be toward the end of the year, and whatever else. So the thing of Pascal's wager, as it applies to this, to get to Jeff's point, is we're trying to do the right thing, even though we don't know what the right thing is, which is kind of like that walk of faith, or that going into the best plan that we know how to put together. And what that does is it makes the individuals that do so on whatever level that they choose to do the best thing that they see as the best thing, to then build something inside of themselves and make the world a better and safer, more prosperous place, and all those things. But you got to find balance and all that. And I think, as I kick it back to you, the key to all of this is balance, in that to a large degree want to hear the different voices and the different sides of the argument in all of this. So there you go.
I would be remiss
Okay.
making sure my mic is back on, because
It is.
I tinkled and I turned it down.
Okay.
I would be remiss if I didn't draw a line here to the let's call it the autism effect, because in my realm of science communication, however humble, this is a thing, because they go, the numbers of autism diagnoses are through the roof. Oh, by 2050, half of the kids are going to be autistic. And the scientifically minded people who kind of understand statistics realize that is actually the result of a couple different things. That comes from A, more testing. We're looking for it now. And B, we know what we're looking for, and C, the definition is expanded to include a whole entire spectrum of things. Whereas before, you would be diagnosed with something like mental retardation, which is a triggery word, but this was a medical diagnosis for a long time before we discovered this thing. So if you're looking at rates of autism, let's say,
If I'm laughing, it's only because now the word, especially talking about retarded in the PC way, now triggers Rick Sanchez, because he was like, "Oh,
that's
this."
retarded. Oh, geez, Rick, I don't know if you were supposed to say that. Oh, well, that's retarded. Like,
No, that was when he had the microscope from that curse selling guy.
The devil.
Like, yeah, and he's like, "Oh, this microscope was gonna make me retarded." Yeah, then that's where Morty's like, "Oh, I don't know if you're supposed to say that." He's like, "Oh, no, it literally would."
No, yeah, it was.
Yeah, okay.
So I think largely COVID deaths. Now, how we're actually measuring those is people who died while they had COVID.
Uh-huh.
So to use an extreme example, if you got hit by a truck and it like crushed your spine and that caused you to die, if you also happen to have COVID in your system at the time, that's marked as a COVID death.
Mm.
Just check right off. It's all in
Wait,
one
it is even the people who
thing.
got hit by a truck.
I that might be a hyperbolic example.
But has
The
that literally
the
happened, or is that literally happening to your knowledge?
the way that I've heard it framed is that whether or not they could specifically point to COVID-19 as the thing that killed the person, if it was present, it's still lumped into the same group. Now, people have been massively shit on for trying to explain this to kind of like delay people of like how the statistics of like how we actually even get the numbers because not everybody's getting tested,
Right.
and the people who are getting tested, the mortality rate on this I think is 1 to 3%. So there's a huge confusion around
Well,
like the people who are
okay,
actually dying and
the
who actually
mortality rate
has
is
it.
really,
And
really, really confusing because the mortality rate that we're getting that number off, that it's between 1 and 3%, is based, as far as I understand, purely off of confirmed cases.
yes,
So there's going to be, we already know that there's going to be plenty of cases that, like, I feel like I probably already had it a month ago and got over it.
yeah,
Maybe not, but they're probably, and they're coming out with a lot of, the more that they've been doing this antibody test, they think that the numbers are a lot higher. So the mortality rate is probably under 1%. But anyway, I'll let you get back to your spiel. It's just that
I
these stats are really hard to pin down.
and this is the thing, and with something as esoteric and kind of ethereal as whether or not God exists, we don't have any data. Okay, and on things like autism and COVID-19, which I'm not trying to draw any kind of equivalence there. I'm saying from a statistical point, there's some synchronicities in how the public is taking that information because you have a bunch of people saying, "Oh no, all the kids are going to be autistic. Oh no, it's the synthetic fertilizers, it's the GMOs, it's the vaccines, it's all these environmental factors, it's the cell phone towers." Like
Yeah.
so there's a level of irrationality that arises from the uncertainty. It's all uncertain on a quantum level if we want to go down that deep. We don't really have exact, this is not carved in stone shit, but we have enough to go off of scientifically to know that, of course, it's better to self quarantine because you're reducing the risk of exposure, you're increasing herd immunity, etc. If you are sick, you're going
Well,
to
okay,
prevent. So that
true.
it's
But the debate is like, okay, there's a lot of these graphs that were coming out when we're first learning why that this is. So I don't know if we want to bring up those statistics or not. But basically, if we behaved as normal, one person in, I don't know, I don't remember the exact time period, whether it was a few days. I think they gave like, okay, here's what happened after a week or a month. But basically, massive spread if we behaved as normal, and then if you uh, shrink your contact with people down to like 50%, then it's like massively less. And if you shrink it down by 75%, that's like even more massively less. But the reality is we can't get our contact down to zero, but we can get
yeah.
it down enough to where it's a manageable thing, or manageable, amount of spread, so to speak. And although this, I think, goes into where I think the debate really is, because, okay, a lot of people, including the Surgeon General and most people who were up at the presidential podium about a month ago were all saying the next week or two are going to be like the Surgeon General called it our Pearl Harbor moment. Basically, they were predicting a lot more fatalities than there actually turned out to be, and they predicted this is a lot worse than it was. So now what we're running into is we're in a place where it seems that we have gotten it to where hospitals should not be overwhelmed. Other than, we had maybe one or two in New York, but they're ready now. So basically we're trying to get to a point, and maybe we've already got to the point where we could almost get back to normal, not in 100% way, but maybe back to like 50% contact or whatever, not huge events, and wear mask and gloves in a lot of situations. And then that'll at least keep it to where the hospitals won't get overwhelmed, which means we won't have more death than what is inevitably going to absolutely happen from COVID within approximately this year. So that's the whole tricky game of all these statistics that we're trying to figure out. And then we're trying to put together a plan. And
I found an even better parallel.
Okay.
And it's the climate change effect. It's the man bear pig thing, guys. Because
what's the man bear pig thing?
Are you not a South Park boy? I
kind of am,
you
but
had to be a South Park boy.
I kind of am, but there's just too many episodes.
Tell me about it. I have them all. Yeah. If you want to come over and binge watch, we'll have a slumber party.
Maybe sometime. Okay.
But
maybe after I get really bored on quarantine. But
when Al Gore came out with his first Inconvenient Truth thing, warning people, warning the general population about the dangers of climate change. There were these predictions in there, predictions from scientists.
There would be no
in the
California
70s.
by now.
Yeah. It's not that extreme, but yes, it was predicted. The predictions didn't match up exactly, and anybody who's criticizing that doesn't understand how statistics work and doesn't understand that the thing that we're actually trying to measure, the global climate, is it's amazing we can get as close as we fucking actually can, but there is a right way and a wrong way. There is a kind of deeper level thing. Like in some sense, climate change activists, they make the man bear pig. They make the big evil monster that's going to doom us all in 100 years. The Statue of Liberty is going to be underwater. Hundreds of millions of people will be displaced. It'll be the fucking apocalypse, which is kind of the narrative in a lot of the climate activism movement. But in terms of actual climate science, if you fall back to the science, they're like, okay, what's the best information that we have, and what are the steps that we can take that are going to move the needle the most and not fuck a bunch of other things up in the process.
Right.
The climate change debate, heavy air quotes, or problem, how our society has been not even really addressing this over the past 30, 40, 50 years, because this has been an ongoing thing. And we're talking about COVID, which is just a couple months old virus outbreak, which is unique. It is bigger and scarier than a lot of the other ones that have come along. When it first kind of popped up, everyone's like, oh, every election cycle there's something that's bird flu or pig flu or dolphin flu or whatever it is. This one, I don't know if it's really especially unique as a pathogen in terms of biology, but it is very unique as a pathogen in the social sense, because this has radically transformed how everyday Americans live their lives. Everybody in the world. I mean, sorry, that sounded America-centric. That was not.
Yeah, it's
horrible.
Yeah, we will never think the same, and we will never live the same. And something that's really disappointed me is I had some borderline excitement going into this apocalypse. Not, of course, in a Hitler kind of way, but in a we are the world holding hands, maybe with gloves or something. Kind of like, hey, cool, we're going to be united on a common enemy that's not each other, and we should be able to uh, work together on something. And
Should asterisk.
yeah. Well, and so I thought there would be a lot more of that, but there has been it's kind of just amplified what everybody already was internally, which
The
I think is
worst parts of humanity
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
There's some good
and the
parts of
best.
humanity.
No,
Yeah,
it's amplified the
there's
best as well. Let me like
it's yeah, it's
caveat that
amplified
in a
like
fucking half.
everything that we are in a lot of different ways, and everything that people are. So, um, which is good. It kind of puts our psyche under the microscope to some degree, or whatever scope. So, yeah, I had a lot of like it's almost like World War II or different uh, things. What just that coming to mind. I think that's maybe the issue. Is okay, World War II, especially because it had such a uh, evil enemy that's still kind of, even to this day, the very personification of evil. But for us to like, hey, we got to overcome that evil thing or evil person or evil regime or whatever, and then it gets a little confusing. A few decades later when we're in the Cold War, and most people in the 80s, I mean, I was born in 82, so I'm like growing up, it's like, oh cool, they're knocking down the Berlin Wall, who cares? Like, just most people, and even Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot, because he was kind of like, I don't know, he was in his 20s at that time, I give or take. But how most people are just like living their lives like, we could all die one day, but it's because they didn't have a hand in all of this. And now it's confusing because it's almost like a Cold War, because we don't have like an actual common enemy that we can see and know how to defeat. Although, back to our point just a minute ago, the thing that we should figure out how to seek and destroy, so to speak, is the metaphorical devil. So, in other words, it's like that red guy with horns that's inside of us. That, like, I don't know if you saw my post, but like a few days ago, I'm just like pumping gas, just like I am right now. No facial covering, because there was nobody else that I saw at the gas station. And some guy comes up and he's like cussing me out. He's like, "You mother, rah, 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 rah." He's like, because I didn't have a mask on. I'm like, sorry. If somebody was coming around, I could have, wrapped it up or put a mask on. He wanted to fight me and everything. But the idea is that, like, some of this is bringing out the worst in us, but probably not in a very destructive way. And some of it's bringing out the best in us. Like, we're seeing, people figure out how to help out senior citizens, get food, and a lot of other things that are showing us how to, like, virtue signal, but actually do something with it.
I wouldn't even call it virtue signaling. It's a
virtue
shift.
doing.
It's a shift, because people are reaching out more to the people that they love and care about. People are appreciating life more. And per the conversation I just had with my dad, which is going to be episode 100, please fucking stay tuned. It's
Congratulations.
Thank you. Per that, I totally lost the thread, because I have a million. I have a million notes here, and I always love it. Conversations that make me take a bunch of notes, because
good. Let's get to them, because I only have masturbation in my notes.
The common enemy thing, I think this is a little bit of a Hollywood trope. It is kind of the Independence Day effect. We always kind of assumed that if we had a common enemy, an
Right.
alien invader, that all of the Earth would come together to defeat it, which, in a sense, is truer than not. But climate change is an excellent example because this fucking beast has been around for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years in the public consciousness, and
Yeah.
we've made almost no fucking progress on it at all.
Well, I don't
And
think
this
we should
is,
say that. We've made
well,
a lot of progress,
re-
but not as
knowing
much as
what
we
we
probably should.
know, we've made nowhere near enough progress.
Yeah,
On
it's
decarbonizing our economy, we're still drilling oil wells and using coal and doing all these things. So we're still
yeah,
fucking up. We're still going to the grocery store without a mask and coughing all over people
yeah.
in a kind of way, most of us. But that's largely like we have to wait for society to catch up. We have to wait for the infrastructure to be in place. And in just tying it back earlier, you said we can't get it to zero, but we could if we lived in fucking Star Trek. Everybody, go to your quarters. We're gonna sanitize the hulls of the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Go to your quarters until this is over, and then it'll be done. We don't have. This is like why communism doesn't work. If we all had fucking synthesizers and we didn't have to worry about money and feeding ourselves, we could have some kind of utopic Star Trek future that was built off of ideas of abundance rather, because we're still very much operating in scarcity of resources, scarcity of land, scarcity of money, scarcity of attention, particularly in the medium we are playing around in right now. It's just a matter of being there, doing the thing that we're doing right
Well,
now to get
the
people to
scarcity thing,
think.
the
I think.
scarcity thing is probably part of our primal instincts slash primal consciousness or whatever you want to call it. Because if you rationally look at it, um, we should maybe not thank God, but thank nature or the universe every day because of this body that we have that can survive like over 3 weeks without food and over days without water. Not that we should try to push that to the limit, but what that means is that and other immunities and things that we develop means that almost okay, if we're not in a third world country, almost everyone will die, will most likely die in an old age situation. um, they're more If you are in a first world country, you're more likely to die in your 70-ish age than not. and and that's even for people who aren't like being super careful, super educated, super have health care or whatever. It's just because of how our bodies are and how our society is that we don't let people starve to death, and we have soap and treatments for infectious diseases and everything else. And so, but back to what I just said on the scarcity thing, our minds always want to kind of act like if we don't do something, we could die, which is just kind of the way that our minds have to work in order to improve. And although I feel like the thing about consciousness is that's kind of like level one consciousness, so to speak, of, uh, you know, stay alive and procreate on some level, if not procreate the species, procreate ideas, because then that's the higher, and not necessarily like you got to make babies, but at least care for the young. But then the higher level is procreate ideas, which is sort of what we're doing right now. And in general, just having conversations, even just in Facebook comments or whatever else, is killing off bad ideas and updating them to newer, better ideas and mental models. So, yeah, I feel like we are not in a world of scarcity, but we imagine we are. And that's good because it makes us get the most out of our world. But to the point of where we're at right now in the sort of like our own ecology ecosystem that we put ourselves in, we have to have a certain amount of work and workers and people, working to keep the internet on so we don't go crazy and keep the lights on and everything else. That's why we can't like contain down to zero, zero contact or almost zero contact. So
Until robots and AI have made human labor completely obsolete, which is on the horizon, kids. Not sure if you're aware of that.
Physical labor to a large degree, but
And intellectual work and office-y type stuff. Computers are going to be able to do most of that.
True, but
tactile stuff, plumbing and electrical. Humans are going to be needed for a long time, but it's going to be those who have like high skills that require amounts of dexterity and creativity that the robots aren't up to yet, but they will get there.
Sure. And this is where, okay, I don't know if anybody else has this exact theory of like spinning off that idea with, I know something you talk about on your other podcasts and everything, the whole UBI notion and everything, which is the idea of, that may be on the horizon. And I listened to a little bit of your recent podcast where it's like, oh, okay, well, what if people just want to smoke pot and play video games? Well, good for them. Yes and no. That's fine. But there also needs to be a path laid out for people to become more educated and productive in some way. And so sometimes I've almost tried to think of it as, rather than just like, hey, let's take these taxes or value added tax and then give it to these other people. I feel like that's really dangerous economically and governmentally. But just to wrap this up before we diverge into that, and maybe check on the comments or whatever. But I feel like what would work better, that we do in a lot of similar things, is to combine a public, private, to combine all the resources that we have. So somewhat government, maybe some taxes, somewhat corporations partnering, somewhat charities / the arts partnering into groups where it's like, okay, instead of just like, here's $1,000 or here's $2,000 a month or whatever it is, it's like, do this ABC task or whatever that you're capable of doing, including some level of education. Like maybe not, here's a whole college degree that you're going to get paid for, like some countries do, but it's like, okay, what is it? Like, if you're getting $1,000 a month, that's like, I did the math, but I forget what it was, but it's like only a couple hours of work per day. If you're doing, it's not even a couple hours of work per day. If you're
like
trying
$2 or $3 a day, I think, or something.
Well, no, but I'm saying like if you said, rather than just here is the money, if you said, okay, in your own spare time / when you make time, do this work or learn these educational things on this website or app or whatever, and you're going to get paid whatever it might be, $10 an hour, $20, $30 an hour, maybe more for certain things, then it's like people can get that done in so many hours. So then they did something educational / productive in their time that they're able to, like we already do in a lot of applications and websites. And then what comes out of that is, one, people are becoming, it's a reinvestment of the resources rather than just like I hope something good comes out of it. It's a reinvestment. And then also, because you can take maybe some taxation, but also some from corporate incentives and some from charitable things. And I almost think of it as part of that idea as like a modern Goodwill / Salvation Army, not in like, we're going to have more people selling secondhand clothes, but in the idea that, even if you can't find anything else to do, there's going to be something for anybody to do. Like in Japan, they talk, like, a big thing in their culture is uh, be industrious. So I don't know about their whole system there, but it's like, rather than the welfare state, it's like, if somebody needs a job or whatever, they need money because they can't get a job, it's not just like, here's some welfare. It's like, here is a job picking up trash off the street or something somewhat productive in some way. So, okay, how do we get on that tangent? It's because that's a big tangent. So maybe I'll just let you respond to that.
This is because
unpack that.
because it seems like a tangent, but it's really not, because we're talking
Right.
about the same kind of how we want these problems to be solved.
Right.
And so much of us, all of us, we expect it to be top down. We expect that at the top
Right.
they'll get
It
it
should be
right, and
bottom
they'll
up.
bring it down the ladder to us. And that is totally backwards, because it is bottom up. It's
Well,
going to take a cultural shift
true, but
in a
there's
way.
both. It's like
Well,
the
yes, we
bottom
need.
shoots up. These are
Yes,
our values, and then the top says, okay, here's what we have
yes.
agreed are your values, and they shoot down, sort of, here's how we can accomplish
It's a
these kind of things.
two-way thing. You
Yeah.
can't just sit down here and go, "Hey, give me money." That's not
Right.
what the UBI movement ultimately is. And the reason that it's taking off is because it's created a cultural shift now, to where people see the value of human life and the value of human labor, and how it being tied to how much money you can physically earn is immoral and unethical and everything. So this is a cultural thing that we are. It's an emergent property of our culture, in the same way that Stetson Kennedy exposing the KKK on the Superman radio show per Drunk History. Watch Drunk History. The show's not brought to you by Drunk History. It got the general population to get on board with, like, hey, yeah, no, like, you guys are dumb, and that's how progress pretty much works throughout our entire history. It's what the civil rights movement was. Abraham Lincoln famously quoted as saying, like, if I could have done this without freeing the slaves, I probably would have. I butchered that. I don't know if that's I'm not a historian, but that's kind of like the thing. It's like it's the cultural groundswell
Yeah.
of
Like the
humanity
zeitgeist.
that creates the top down. Yes, so it is bottom up. It's both, but the bottom up part is the more powerful part. Okay, because
Right.
it's the by mass alone.
Right. Like in a democratic society, the president is a civil servant, and
Yes,
the same thing for the senators and everything else. And so really, you and I are the boss, but
we pick them, we put them in their jobs, we pay their bills, we pay their
right.
paychecks. Yes.
We are the boss, but the tricky thing is, and this kind of goes into the Venturian man and goes into everything that we're talking about, is the person that is the boss is every individual. And that's where it gets tricky, because then it makes us have to do this and talk together and come up with ideas, and especially people who have uh, differing ideas. And then it's like we figure out where certain ideas are going to get stuck because they have certain values that are out of place, or where maybe certain people are going to have to compromise and whatever else, so that we can live in this world full of billions of individuals that hopefully will thrive and flourish. But okay, so we got on a little tangent there, which is a good one.
Oh, it was great. It was great. It was fantastic. I don't know where we're at with the comments. Since you're the host, I'm gonna let
Oh
you.
yeah. Well,
I'll let you
I'll see if I can
manage
just
that.
sort through this real quick. So um, this is all Jeff. Jeff's our viewer at the moment.
Love you, Jeff.
No,
Thanks for being here, man.
you're the best. Sorry if we ever troll each other, but that's the game.
Mhm.
I'm I'm not sure.
Overall aspects of Pascal's rather
Have you,
should. This is the is ought
yeah,
problem.
I don't know if we want to get into that right now because he also, what's the other one? Is this people get more amped up against each other the more people become out of sight, out of mind, and this quarantine has certainly lowered human interactions in a real way, and therefore our empathy. Okay, that's a big, tricky thing. Like, okay, one of the memes that I actually made, I'm probably not going to find it right now, but is, it's like the cat with a monkey wrench looking at a car like he's going to fix it. And I think he has a cigarette in his mouth. But it's the idea that everybody is individually trying to look at this whole pandemic problem and like, oh, I know how to fix it. Just do this and this and this. And this is really tricky because we're trying to solve it. Okay, this is kind of a good point because as people are doing exactly what Jeff is talking about here often, getting amped up against each other, whether it's protest or wanting to fight each other over a mask or whatever else. We're going through this thing of a loss of empathy. I don't know. It's a tricky thing because we're losing our connection with each other. Oh, okay. Because what I always this is the debate I get with people sometimes is as we're getting all amped up, like or like boo the president, and Jeff and Jesse and I got into this a couple times where it's like, yes, of course the president's an idiot. That's the most obvious fact in the universe, maybe. But it's like to like troll the internet all day is like, he told people to drink bleach, impeach him or whatever. It's okay. First of all, that's not even a fact. And then secondly, it's like, okay, but the fact that we need to focus on is what can we do to like affect the world in a positive way.
He's a spy. Blow him up. I'm gonna go take a shit.
Okay.
It was a joke. I was waiting to squeeze that one in there.
Okay.
He's a spy. Blow him up. I'm gonna go take a shit.
Yeah. I was like, what did you say? No, but okay. What I always tell people though is okay. What I always tell people though is okay. Let's not use these inflammatory things where we can escape our own devils, so to speak, which is kind of like to get onto this whole point of what we can really accomplish in our own sort of version of a ultra Cold War, I don't know what you'd call this war on a plague of. It's almost like a Cold War, but I don't know what you might term it as, a plague war or something.
It's kind of a spiritual war in a way.
It's a psychological war, you could say.
It is absolutely a psychological war, 1,000%. And the angels and demons whispering that metaphor. I'd made a note about this earlier. The angel on one shoulder, the demon on the other, whispering in your ears, little sweet nothings, to try and tug you in one way or the other. That still feels too external. They're not sitting on your shoulders. They're inside you. They're inside your head. They're inside your heart.
Well, they are, but at the same time, they're embodied, but they're also disembodied because they would behave one way, like if you were alone on an island, but they behave the way that they do because we're not each alone on an island. We are in this world full of the world that judges us, nature that judges us, all those other things. So that's why it's true, and I get what you're saying, and I largely agree with it. That, and maybe I'm just trying to see if we can straighten out this perspective that yes, it's an internal thing, and it's not like disembodied like this, and maybe that's sort of like a mythology that we use to say, oh, like angels, but maybe it doesn't work, but maybe it does work in that it's because it's embodied, but it's also disembodied, but it's both. And we have to be able to kind of understand that, how that we're our internal judge, but there's the reason that we sort of disembody it is because it's this multi-level, multi-layer phenomenon of how do I judge myself? How do those closest to me judge me, and my those who are naturally my influence, whether that's coworkers or schoolmates or friends, and then those of my family, those of my community, those of my city, those of my county, those of my state, and those in my country, those in the world. Like those are all like different. Like that's how those kind of things become gods and actual mythologies, because they don't know how to conceptualize them, so they just call it a god. It's like, okay, cool, there it goes, there it is. But it kind of works, but it is a reality of you're judged a certain way based on the county. Like where I'm at, we have like not every day, but sometimes I'll tune into these updates for my county, as far as here's our updates for how we're doing in our county. And I see on a certain Facebook group of how my city is doing. I see on sometimes how the governor of California is doing his speeches and updates, and then he'll like turn it over to some doctor, scientist people, and then of course the president turns it over to his people. And as much as he's just like an idiot talking, he's mainly going off of his actual decisions are mainly going off of his team of doctors, which most of the main ones you see. And then of course then there's the global scale. So it's like these judges of us that aren't just, and there's both good and bad ones, of course. Like it's hard to get a grasp on what's going on in China, and then it's hard to get a grasp on some of the other potentially deceptive devils in the world, so to speak, like China, even North Korea. What's going on there? They say they have 0 cases of COVID. Probably not, but so anyway, you were on your you mentioned the whole like devil on your shoulder, because we're in a psychological warfare right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So which was off of this point. Wait, was it off of this point? So
it wasn't. We hadn't gotten to that one yet.
We haven't gotten to that one.
This is why I don't do the live streams. I'm horrible at keeping up on the comments and responding to people in real time, because I'm always so engaged.
Yeah.
In whatever the conversation may be. So
okay, but
if this is still from Jeff, you need to go to the facebook.com/StreamYard or whatever to give StreamYard permission to let us see your
it's like two or three clicks,
and
then I won't say Facebook user, it'll say Jeff, but
yeah,
it is all Jeff here, and that's cool. But
love you, Jeff.
Yeah, hearts and rainbows or something.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so but the point that I was getting at with these guys and in general is that sometimes we can put a lot of time and energy into that was the point, is that we can curse out the president or whoever else, and that's kind of, it helps us in a non-productive way ignore our own devils / demons, or whatever we want to metaphorically call them, or our own dark side, and it personifies our own dark side by projecting it onto someone else. When the better response to help us overcome that is to find people that we can have a good effect on, which are mostly going to be in our immediate influence. So some of it might be doing something like this or having conversations like this. Some of it might be just talking to our family. Some of it might be figuring out if there's someone in your community or your influence that is going through a rough time, that needs some human connection. And to Jeff's point right here, we really need to more than ever, find those people who maybe need a connection because they're like losing their stuff, or I have a friend who whose father is going through some really bad cancer situation. Like, thousands of people die every day, every year, regardless of COVID and any other viruses. And so we need to find ways to be there for each other, just in our own like local influence. And if we can't do that, like we don't know anybody who's dying or any poor people or people struggling with whatever psychological issues or whatever, then that's kind of like what we're doing right now, is we're trying to better prepare for when those opportunities come. So
I'm going to push back on Jeff a little bit here because
sure.
this specific outbreak, COVID, in a sense, it has. Yay! There he is. Thank you, Jeff. We get to see your pretty scruffy face. I love it. In a way, this has made social interactions, real world social interactions, very different from how we're used to operating. With especially other consumers who are, braving the apocalypse to go to the grocery store to stock up on their provisions as a absolutely necessary thing to do. Everybody's very freaked out. Stay away from me. I got my mask. I just stay away. So there's that part, which I don't know if, because certainly you get the attitudes, you get the paranoid attitudes, and then the dickish attitudes of the person at the gas station that you were talking about, like, why the fuck aren't you wearing a mask?
Yeah.
And in a sense, that actually is kind of a kind of empathy. But the thing that I've noticed most about this particular thing, because I live in Podunk, I live in the middle of nowhere, and the people in customer service who I'm used to interacting with over the past several years, it's all very shallow. It's like, hey, that's such and such. Here's your product. The thing that I've noticed about going out and doing drive-through or going and picking up supplies for the bunker is that there are a lot more people now who, the essential workers, who they just, something changed inside them to where they're like, I'm going to be the best version of myself today. Going through the drive-thru, hey, this is so-and-so, hey, like, let me get that order for you. And then they get up to the window, oh, hey, and then they just have this great energy about them, and they're striking up conversations because they have their own social bubbles are kind of deflating, so they're taking that opportunity to reach out to people in their own community who they run across on the regular, strangers. So I've noticed a huge increase in kindness and empathy from strangers just because that's the way that they cope with this darkness. That's the way that they get through their workday when they're forced to go in the midst of all this shit, and okay, here's all these extra fucking things you have to do. You have to cover your thing. You have to put on gloves. You have to like wash your hands 80 times a day, which is all good. Which is, the preventative measures are good, but psychologically, we lost Isaac for a second. Psychologically, people react very different to that. And the one thing that I've noticed is a huge surge of people who are using this darkness to bring out their own light, to try and make somebody else's day better, to make a stranger's day better. Right. And that's not something I saw a whole lot before this. So there really is a silver linings thing going on here. I don't think people are losing their empathy. I think it's actually the opposite. I think that this is kind of forcing us culturally to reckon with that. And it's just coming out, it's expressing itself in different ways. So social distancing is a kind of empathy in that, like, yes, I want you to stay the fuck away from me because I don't want you to get me sick, but I also don't want you to get sick. That's why we're doing this. This is...
Well, yeah, or really the literal thing is like people are like, oh, let's let young people go to the playgrounds, or let's let this and that happen with young people because it's only an issue for old people. And that is a lot of times where the issues still are, is like dealing with teenagers and dealing with young adults that are sneaking around for booty calls and whatever else. And
School's out, work's out, parents are having to stay home with their kids for the first time in a long
yeah,
time, trying to figure this shit out. Yeah, it's I'm not in that boat, thankfully. I don't have kids,
yeah,
but
yeah. I've
the
just got the
dogs have
puppy.
certainly noticed I'm home a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. But so, but it's not about like if you or me get sick because we'll probably get better. It's about if you or me uh, will, if I give it to you and then you give it to, because I gave it to you, then you're able to give it somehow to Jose at McDonald's or whatever. And then Jose goes home and he's not thinking and he forgets to wash his hands or some little virus is somewhere. And then he gives it to his grandma and then no more grandma, Jose, whatever. Uh, so that's kind of the roundabout way of what it's about. But on the other hand, and the as I'm kind of like trying to talk about the practical aspect to it, is okay. Let's just say in that sort of like example that I put together off the top of my head, Jose in McDonald's has his grandma then get COVID, who's like 70 years old, and she has to go to the hospital. The main thing is now the hospitals can handle it because we've kept it at a level where the hospitals won't be overrun. And Jose's grandma, who's a hypothetical person with a hypothetical grandma, would probably get COVID at some point this year ish anyway. And then hopefully she would survive by going to the hospital at some point. But so it's like there's probably an automatic, like, unfortunate number of people that are going to die from this new, like, it's a debate on if we can call it a flu-like virus or whatever, but it is a strain, a flu-like strain, and the reason it behaves the way that it is, just like if nobody ever had the flu and then all of a sudden here comes the flu, it's because nobody's ever had this form of whatever that you want to call this virus, that it's so contagious. But as soon as everybody gets it, we have maybe not a total immunity, but a level of immunity. So there's a certain amount of people that are going to die no matter what, and that's unfortunate. And of course, we'd prefer them to have a few more months or whatever, but you have to find that balance of overall public health, because at a certain point there becomes a trade-off of the cure becoming worse than the disease was in the first place. So that's why we're in that tricky balance.
I do want to respond to Jeff here, or just elaborate a little bit more
Sure,
on
sure, sure.
empathy, because and Sam Harris had an excellent episode on this
Okay.
against empathy. Empathy doesn't necessarily mean compassion.
Okay.
So when I say that the kind of paranoid darkness that people are kind of retreating into here, it's not, that's not an against empathy thing. It's actually a social consciousness, a social awareness of, hey, we got to get on board and do that. I do think that that is deeply empathic. I think that the thing that's out there right now that says fuck empathy is the people who are having protests, the people who are like, no government's going to tell us we can't go to church. We want 1,200 people. Bring your kids. It doesn't matter if you're sick. Come anyway, because that's your God-given right. That is fucking sociopathy. Those people are fucking sociopaths. If they're like, I don't care if you have a deadly virus, bring your kids. So I will agree with you that, like, Jeff, that part being brought out of humanity, which is a deep thing that's always been there. My only real point is that, because I've noticed it, I've seen it in beautiful ways. I've been hearing from people who I haven't heard from in a gajillion years, who we're having deep conversations. I'm talking to my family more. I'm talking to my friends more. I'm talking to strangers more. People who have to work through this shit, and be there every day. You know, they don't get the luxury of getting to stay home like me, which is not a fucking luxury.
Yeah. Same.
There seems to be a shift And it's worth cherishing and valuing that change in people, in the customer service workers who are forced to work through all this, and then just their defense mechanism is to just have the best, just give the best service ever. Because I've seen this again and again and again and again, and they strike up a conversation like we're old friends, and they're just like, "Oh yeah, I was telling so and so about the," and they just you see that urge, that urge to connect, because people need that. We're social animals.
Yeah.
We are probably the most advanced mammal, maybe. I don't know, that might sound anthropocentric, but we are social animals, and we need our social connection, and that's not something that necessarily has to be face to face. We are blessed with the powers of the gods to be able to do this over at the speed of light, mind you, Isaac. We're doing this at the speed of light over the internet, and you're somewhere completely else on the planet, but we're connecting socially. Jeff is here in the comments. He's engaging. I don't know where you are, Jeff, but it's that there are more than there are more ways to connect. I guess.
Well, let me diverge on that, which is the idea of biologically we connect in more real ways, and we're losing that ability in an in-person way. And because if I have a human being in front of me, like you, for example, this is why that, like, a lot of the interview shows, like even, podcasts like Joe Rogan and everything, they will have, at least in normal circumstances, probably not right now, but in normal circumstances, they'll do their best to have the conversation face to face. The reason is because if you, like, I can look at you and get some idea of how we're listening to each other or thinking about what we're talking about and everything else. But if we're in the same room, sharing the same air, looking at each other, okay, I'm sure you know about mirror neurons, but mirror neurons, oh yeah. But that is, it helps, it one helps us to helps our learning ability as engineers, so to speak. So because I can usually how we learn is through mimicry at first until we pick it up, and that's through our mirror neurons. And then the other is that's like how we became empathic creatures. And I don't know if I want to. Well, I guess it's an interesting idea that Sam, I don't remember if it was the first or second debate, but Sam and Jordan got into this issue. I think what they were trying to get at is how that our consciousness or psychology is a little bit ill adapted to the current world, because I forget the exact story, and I think it was just one that Sam kind of came up off the top of his head, but he said, like, let's say he used different names, but he just said, okay, there's this girl Lily on some remote place in Africa, and then you show her her little brown eyes or whatever, and you feel sorry for Lily. And because you feel sorry for Lily, you want to do something to get her education and make sure she doesn't get malaria or whatever else. But then, so you feel like 100% empathy because you connected with Lily. But then, and he used a different name. Yeah. But then if you show her brother Mubatu or whatever, some other little brother of hers, and you're like, okay, look, I know you're able to help Lily, but you can, for just, instead of spending $10, you can spend $13, and you can help them both equally. What will often happen is, and then you can even say, oh, but you can also help her cousin, you can help her uncle, and all this stuff. Then at a certain level,
goes down.
Every level it goes down, when it should be going up. If we think rationally, it should be going up. Like, oh my God, there's more people we can help, and I can do it this and this way. And that's the way that some people think, and some corporations think. Like, that's what Bill Gates has been trying to get at with his foundation, and some others. And I know that's up for debate, but We won't really go there, but that's what some people try to get at is how that we can solve a lot of the issues in the world. Like that's what like a lot of people think that the what do you call it, Starlink satellite train is just a fun thing, but it's a what's his name, Elon Musk thinks of it as a humanitarian project because he wants to get all the lilies and mubatus in Africa internet for their education and everything else all around the world, high-speed internet, and I don't know how many decades he's got the goal. So anyway, that's how our mind works, is that if we've got a person with us here face to face and they look at us with their eyes and they say, hey, I'm hungry, whatever, it's like, oh, I feel really bad, here, have my, eat my sandwich, whatever. But then if it's a strange way that our psychology is. Now, to Jeff's point here a few minutes ago that we kind of been on is as we've separated ourselves, we've lost that empathy both biologically and somewhat rationally. So I think you're both right and we're all right in the fact that it's just what's really happened though is we've kind of just like taken apart our psychology as individuals and groups, and we're able to look at it in different ways. Because now we're like the reason that those customer service workers are so nice is, yes, it brings out some of their innate desire to do good, but it's also because you and me and everybody is kind of craving for social interaction because, like you just said, we're social animals.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different things going on the psychological level. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. Yeah, human beings are really complicated.
Extremely complicated. And I get that he's talking about proximity-based, face-to-face type things, which I have noticed. I'm not going to put percentages to them, but like in the same way that I've gotten a lot of people going, oh, stay away from me.
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of people be doing, hey man, what's up? How are you? How's your day? I've gotten it almost seems equal in the way the directions that people kind of branch off into. Some of them go into the darkness, some of them go into the light.
I would say that it's more to the light, but it's tricky because our light stuff we have to do from 6 feet apart. Like if
we don't amplify it.
Well,
as a society generally, we don't amplify the light. We amplify the dark shit.
Well, and just if I'm like out and about living my life, like you're talking about, and seeing people, whether it's at 7-Eleven or at wherever, Target, or I've been able to safely at social distance go on some hikes, and I'll see people and they'll like try to like howdy neighbor from 6 feet away or whatever, and that's cool. But it's tricky because if this was some other social distancing type of a thing, and we could be understood to be able to safely go sometimes within 6 feet, and it's cool, then it'd be different, because then you could be like, oh, let's strike up a conversation, neighbor, like normally within a few feet of each other. But it's tricky. Like I'll be walking my dog sometimes, and then the neighbors or whoever else will be like, oh, let's have our dogs like greet each other or whatever, which kind of works out because that sort of like dog greeting keeps us about 6 feet away, but that's the tricky aspect to it. And so I think it's more light than dark, but the light is hard to bring out because of the rules that we're trying to live in.
No, it doesn't always have to be face to face though, because I've had just personally in my own mission, as it were, lately I've been connecting very, very, very deeply with people that I've never met. In addition to my dad, like I'd mentioned earlier, episode 100 of my show is going to be with my fucking dad, which is nuts.
Don't cry.
It's nuts. I cry all the time on my show, cry. Isaac. If you don't cry on your show, cry. You need to cry.
Okay.
because it's super valuable. But like I've been meeting new people who like when they get put into the darkness in the little corner, we have the most amazing tool right here to reach out and connect with the entire world.
Yeah.
And the light that I've been seeing emerge from this darkness, I call it the light of morning. And I have a new series on my YouTube channel, Mindwave Podcast, youtube.com. It's about finding the storytellers who have the light inside of them and want to share it, and then to be able to bring people together under those messages of light, because it's not like, certainly, yes, we're social animals, and it would be much better if I could see you in person and it in a weird kind of monkey way be able to smell you, because this goes
Yeah.
back to a another episode I just had of Human Nature, which is not published yet. But there is something kind of really deeply human about the like human interactions. But what we're doing here is kind of superficial. It's simulacra in a way. But as Connor might say, like the placebo effect is real. Like placebos do work. So in whatever way that we can recreate human connection, because I feel very close to you, Isaac, right now, and that's not just because I'm drinking scotch. I feel very close to you, and we are very, very far apart. We're just coming together in this time to try and talk through some of it. And I
Yeah.
don't
That's
think
why it's good to do more of
this
these.
is
Yeah.
yes, this is proximity. I feel
Right.
very
Right.
close to you right now. So that's really what I was pushing back on
And Jeff.
with Jeff, and Jeff, you too, man. Like I almost get never anybody ever pushing back on me. So I fucking love that you push back on that, because that's how conversations work. That's how connection works. That's what we're doing. So please disagree with me, and let's find those areas of disagreement and fucking dig through them, comb through them, and do the little brush, like you're dusting off, very lightly dusting off dinosaur bones. You know what I mean? Let's examine that, because there's the
Although,
thing, this whole project.
well, okay, I'll just
I'm
go
gonna
on
shut up.
a slight tangent. Is that okay? Hmm. Blah, 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 blah. So, like, I'm thinking about I want to record something, and I think we'll talk about it later, off air or whatever. Of the light of morning idea, but a lot of what I try to get at is, and this is why I try to be a responsible troll sometimes, and I think we all do. It's because it's good to, in a, I don't know if I want to say mature, but in a productive way, get at the disagreements also. And the reason we want to productively get at the disagreements is because, and I probably bring this up because of what Jeff just said, that it's a rare agreement with us, and I think that Jeff and I and some others, maybe Jesse and maybe one or two others, often disagree. Is just because okay, if we totally agree on something, like, oh, we're eating pizza all the time, we don't even notice. Like, okay, we're roommates or whatever, brothers that are just eating pizza. Who cares? But if we fight over the toppings and then we realize how to, whatever, put mushrooms on one half of the pizza instead of both, and make one person suffer by having to pick them off or whatever the case, then it's not just that we've had a better dinner, it's that we become better human beings that share food, which is kind of to the original point that we were on like an hour or two ago.
Oh yeah, we've been going for a hot minute here, and we should probably wrap it up
Yeah,
relatively soon. I have to pee
yeah,
again,
yeah.
but this is just part of my own personal philosophy, and it on disagreement, because I feel like a lot of our disagreements
Yeah.
in life, it's kind of like seeing different colors, or we're using different words for the same thing. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
we're fucking bug. We're we're both using the best tools in our toolbox to explain what we're actually doing, but we're actually talking about the same thing. It's not actually disagreement. We're just coming at it from two different trajectories, if you will. We're coming in from two different places to the same point, and they don't match up. If you want to make a spacecraft analogy, the orbits and the trajectories don't line up,
Right.
but that's not necessarily a disagreement. We're seeing the same picture, but your blue might not be my blue. To use that kind of classic
It might
brain
be
science example.
the same blue, but they might mean different things. Like some people
Yes,
look at a blue
yes.
sky and become happy, and some people look at a blue sky and become sad.
Hmm.
Uh,
It's that. I think it has to do something deep. There's something deeply human about it, where the things that we're framing as disagreements, which tear society apart. We disagree about, what God thinks, to tie it back to the beginning. Meanwhile, the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims all have the same God, but they fucking just go at each other like there's no. And it's like, but you
yeah.
guys, you're using different words for the same thing. Okay, you explore all the cultures of the world, you explore all the different gods. I think if we got on that same page, guys, we're using different words for the same thing because there are a million different languages and how many different gods on this planet. We're trying to do the same thing, and I think shedding this label of disagreement over
Yeah.
these kind of things, we're just coming at it from different angles, and but
Yeah.
we're really trying to do the same thing, and I think
And
that's
without really going on a
important.
tangent, but I think when we bring to light those kind of religious disagreements, you could say in the West, I feel like I don't want to go too much down this rabbit hole, but the glue that can redeem those or reconcile those differences is probably uh, the whole East West coming together. And in other words, the values of the Eastern religions are also the values of the Western religions, but they're sort of I don't know if I'd call it repressed or suppressed. And so if you bring to light those values that are a little bit um, neglected in the Western religions, it can kind of bring together the understanding of people harmonizing together better, at least
Hmm.
in peaceful ways, hopefully.
It's interdisciplinary,
Yeah.
it's interfaith, it's secular, it's democratic,
Yeah.
and ultimately it's Darwinian. The thing that we're doing,
Yeah.
and God, that's a beautiful way to end it. I really do need to pee
Yeah.
again,
Okay.
which
Quick
is
break. Cool. Quick break, and then we'll try to wrap it up
yeah.
and
We'll close it up in
peace
a
out.
Yeah, yeah.
nice little
Let's
package
see
to
if we
send
can
out.
get
This has
some of
been
this
fucking fantastic.
comments and wrap it up and maybe talk again tomorrow. All right, quick break.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I don't know if we want to get into all this right now or if we already did.
We're I think we just got to get you on, Jeff. I think.
Yeah, well, we should maybe
form.
tomorrow if you're available, Jeff, about the same time. I'll probably talk a little bit with Jenner and hopefully BJ too if he can get some free time from his baby. Yeah.
I was looking just on my own little closeout. I'm gonna riff on that
Sure.
last little point on
Sure.
language because there are a lot. There are thousands of languages in the world. According to my cursory Google search, over 7,000 languages
Active right now.
spoken today.
Wow.
Yes, the number is constantly in flux, obviously.
Sure.
But in terms of world languages, we are all using different words, but we are all humans. We all live the human experience,
Right.
and I think if we realize on a ground level, on a base level, that a lot of the times we're just using different words for the same thing, then this gets into personal responsibility and personal respect, respect for the self, respect for the individual. I think that if we really want to move the needle the farthest, that is one of the kind of core axioms that we need to incorporate into our philosophy collectively as humanity, not like you need to adopt this. But I think if we all just came to that kind of realization that we're talking about the same thing and we're just using different words because language itself is a fucked up mess of a nightmare. I mean, it's especially English. It's cobbled together from a bunch of fucking goddamn the fucking Rick and Morty monsters, man.
It's like the Latin languages. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. It's like it's a superficial thing. It's a superficial thing happening that we're calling disagreement. But if we actually kind of dig underneath it, we'll discover we're not actually really disagreeing much at all. We're just seeing things a little bit differently, and that's my cosmic nugget of wisdom for you guys, if I have one.
Yeah, and before we totally wrap up, yes, there is. So there's the idea that, okay, what it is that we're after the same goals. We're after the same goals, which sometimes we don't realize what the same goals are that we're all after, which is to kind of like transform ourselves and make the world in a better place. And at the same time, we're struggling with authority and trying to figure out what the little metaphorical devils and what the metaphorical angels are and all that. That's just constantly going on, whether we know it, acknowledge it or not. And then a lot of the so-called disagreement, or what appears as disagreement, is the idea that everybody's at different points in their journey. So in other words, like we've run into that in our sort of little like group of people, partly because like I don't know if we asked, but I'm not sure where Jeff's at in the country or the world. We've got some people in Florida, Jesse. We've got Connor's in Washington. We've got people like all over the world in our sort of little circle that's forming or whatever. And some people go in and out of that circle or whatever. But that's just like geographically. And then some of them are in their mid-20s. Some of them are in their late 30s or more. I've had people on here that are...
Sorry, dog's tripping. Jeff is in New Mexico.
Oh, that's right. Is that what it is? Okay, New Mexico. Cool. That's funny. He's there, and you're like in the middle of us in Arizona. I'm in California.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Cool. So in other words, people are going to be on different points in their journey. So you might disagree with maybe a younger person in our group, for example, because they're at a different point in their journey where in a year or a month or in 5 years, they might be like, oh my God, they were right all along. Like one example that kind of sheds light on this, and oh cool, Milo's here. He's a little older than us, but he's in Detroit, Michigan, and we're all from different backgrounds. Is kind of the point. But where was it? Oh, so we're just all from different backgrounds, so that's why there's this disagreement, and so we're constantly like, here's my perspective, and here's how to help this person on their journey. And so even if we're somewhat at odds or fighting with each other, sort of, it's to help each other out in our journey as individuals and as groups and as an overall group of humanity. And so, but if we just are like, cool, bro, there's my person that agrees with me on everything, awesome, dude, then that's how we like never learn. But if we're like, oh, here's somebody that I kind of disagree with or have a different perspective on this issue, then we're able to learn. It's like the people that are constantly like going into their whole like, this is my tribe, screw all you guys that aren't my tribe, they're gonna kind of like have to get left by the wayside, so to speak, compared to those who are able to be like, hey, how can I resolve or work together with those who we disagree with? So there we go.
It's philosophy as a verb. It's a thing that you do,
right,
guys.
An active thing.
It's a process.
Action verb.
Yes, it is a heavy action verb.
Right.
That describes a process of what we're doing. It's not an external thing. It's kind of like science. Science is in a sense it's kind of a noun, but really it is a verb. It's a thing that we do to try and understand the world better.
Right.
And in terms of human relation and human interaction, philosophy really is kind of the verb there.
Sort of like love.
Yeah.
That's where relationships fall apart, whether they are friendships or in any kind of group, and most commonly in intimate relationships, is they're like, oh, I loved you and then I fell out of love with you, or I loved you and then I didn't love you. Did I ever love that person? The difference is in all relationships where there's a level of love, which there is in all, but in different ways and forms and levels, is every day you have to somewhat constantly put that in action. And in effect, you are, whether you know it or not. You're always putting that in action. So it's how that you put that in action so that actively transforms the individuals and the relationship to a bigger, better thing. And that's what we're always doing in our philosophy and in our ways that we come together in the world, unfold and fold together and rebuild our models and our way that we are as conscious psychological beings.
I feel like that is a beautiful bow to play on the top of this. This has been a phenomenal conversation, man. Thank you for inviting me on today.
Yeah.
Unexpected, but very welcome. Very, very welcome. This feels like it needed to happen.
For sure.
And I'm very excited to kind of get you in on the Light of Morning project, because I'm sure you have something phenomenal to add to.
I think mine is going to be the light of the night, but what that's going to be that I'm trying to work on, I don't know how literal or how metaphorical or whatever I want to get, but the idea is how that the like a full moon is the most important light that there is, and that when you can find the darkness, what you can find in the darkness is often more important than what you can find in the light of the day. And although I do like the light of morning idea too, and just that's overcoming the darkness, but also being able to understand that sort of the night light, or the light of a moon, or especially the full moon. We think of it as the moon. This is like a deep old mythological idea, but that we think of that as, well, it's deep and old, but I don't know at what point that we realized that the moon doesn't have its own luminosity. It's reflecting the sun, which is a lot of where a lot of symbolism came of, like the sun, even in Egyptian mythology, is representing the highest god, and then the moon sometimes is representing a trickster type god. But anyway, sorry I ruined my bow by putting another bow on top of it.
No, it's
just
great.
Brainstorming I'm doing.
Because that's also a total thing that's emerging within this whole light of morning thing, is that there is beauty in the darkness.
Right.
The darkness can be scary. Per my last conversation with my dad, we talked about being in the middle of the ocean and kind of that level of darkness, not being able to see around you, not being able to see where the ocean ends and the sky begins.
Right.
And it feels very lonely and dark and cold and scary. But if you look up, you can see the most amazing thing you've ever seen, which is, the universe. And there may be something swimming around under you. It could be a shark that wants to bite your legs off. It could be a big, beautiful humpback whale who's going to come up and say hello and then peacefully meander off onto his own way. So it's there is beauty in the darkness. There's
what that is,
this
light. Goes into what I hate to go in, I don't know, but it's the really important thing of understanding the unknown. I was trying to find like Jeff's first comment on that. Oh, almost never known. So if we grasp the idea that there's a lot that we don't know, and you can call that darkness, but the unknown is an important thing to respect as such.
It's the compass that guides us to what there is to know, in a kind of way.
Yeah, and the values to when we encounter those unknown things, what we're going to do with them. Like, do we destroy them, or do we build them up, or what do we do with them? Anyway, cool. Good talk, and we'll see what happens tomorrow between us and probably Jeff for a bit, and hopefully BJ will be able to get on, and maybe even some other people, and we'll see what happens.
Let's do it. All right. And thank you very much for having me on today. This was an absolute blast. I cannot wait to get into more of this and do more of this, because it is a verb. And love is a verb, man. And I love you, man. I really mean that. This was fucking awesome.
All right. All the love.
Big heart hands.
Yeah. Heart hands.
Love you guys. And thanks for watching to the handful of you.
Yeah.
Our mutual Rick shirts.
Yeah.
I love it. You guys were awesome for joining, and thank you for being a part of this with us, because it's small and humble, but the biggest thing in the universe at the same time.
All right, cool. That's it. There we go. Another bow on top. All right.
Peace.
Thanks, guys, and peace. See you tomorrow. Bye.